We have breaking news tonight from Sanford, Florida, where Trayvon Martin was killed. The police chief has just received a vote of no confidence from the city commission. The man who has the exclusive power to fire that police chief is my first guest.
I just want this guy arrested and so he can be brought to justice.
The controversial shooting of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin.
The alleged shooter, a self-appointed neighborhood watch leader, remains free.
This man, it is unbelievable to me, has not been arrested.
This young man was walking home, minding his business.
Trayvon was not the aggressor.
He was approached by Zimmerman.
Zimmerman claims self-defense.
He kept pursuing Trayvon Martin.
What is Zimmerman standing his ground for?
Questions are being raised about the Florida law that might protect the shooter.
The Justice Department is looking into it.
The NAACP is calling for Sanford Police Chief Bill Lee, this is him, to resign.
The police chief, Bill Lee, is not talking.
They decided on the scene to be the judge and jury.
It's no longer just a Sanford Police Department issue.
The grand jury will investigate.
Why didn't they take a background check on the man who had just killed this kid in cold blood?
Questions raised in the past about the conduct of the Sanford Police Department.
They did a background check on Trayvon Martin.
My son is murdered. My son is not with us no more. Nothing can bring him back.
Breaking news tonight in the case of Trayvon Martin. With the outrage building across the country tonight, Sanford's City Commission passed a vote of no confidence in Police Chief Bill Lee. In tonight's meeting, the vote was 3-2 against Chief Lee, and one member of the commission called for Chief Lee's immediate resignation.
Because of the situation being so poorly handled and because there's a no confidence level in our police chief here locally and statewide, nationally, and even internationally, I would ask the chief to step down.
Joining me now for an exclusive interview is the man who will decide Chief Lee's fate, the city manager of Sanford, Florida, Norton Bonaparte, Jr. Thank you very much for joining me tonight, Mr. Bonaparte.
Thank you for having me.
The case you just heard from that city commissioner for Chief Lee resigning, do you think that those points are valid points and reasons for him to resign?
Well, let me start by saying that what happened was a tragedy. The loss of life, the loss of Trayvon Martin was regrettable, and as a parent, I can't even begin to think of the loss and the pain that his family must be going through. And I think it's very important that we always remember that a young man that had a promising future is now not with us, and that's the very painful reality of it. In terms of the City Commission's vote this evening of no confidence in Chief Lee, I have stated that I believe we need to have an independent investigation, not only into just the shooting that took place, but also the actions of the Sanford Police Department. I've stated that I want to know, as the city manager, did the Sanford Police do things they shouldn't have done, or did they not do things that they should have done? That's the basis on the information that I would make a determination on moving forward with the Sanford Police Department.
Do you think that those three commissioners who voted the vote of no confidence tonight cast the correct vote?
I think they voted their conscience.
Now, you participated in a meeting with the Justice Department in Washington about this case?
Yes, I did.
And tell us about that meeting, how it went.
It was very fruitful. We had a meeting with Ms. Tom Perez, the Assistant Attorney General, and we asked that they do an investigation. The Mayor Triplett, as well as Congresswoman Brown and I met last Friday, and one of the things that came out that meeting was a commitment to seek the Attorney General's involvement. We sent a letter to him, and we did get a meeting yesterday with his staff, and we were very encouraged by their agreement to come in and look. The City of Sanford is very welcoming to an open investigation. I think it's only fair to the citizens of Sanford, as well as to the rest of the country, that an outside independent review be done of this situation.
Mr. Bonaparte, you issued a statement last week answering what you called frequently asked questions about the case. I want to read from that. You said in answer to the question, why was George Zimmerman not arrested the night of the shooting. Your document says that Mr. Zimmerman provided a statement claiming that he acted in self-defense, which at the time was supported by physical evidence and testimony. What physical evidence and what testimony supported his claim of self-defense?
If I could make a correction, what I issued was a statement saying that there have been frequently asked questions about what has gone on, and I asked the police chief to provide responses. So what you've read was written by the police chief, Chief Lee. I did not write it. I simply passed on information that I thought it was important to get out to the public. The responses were prepared by Chief Lee.
And did you read it? Are you satisfied with it?
I think there are some questions. I have some questions. I know members of the commission have questions. That's why we've asked for an outside review.
He did say in here that by Florida statute, law enforcement was prohibited from making an arrest. That's apparently a reference to the Stand Your Ground law. There is an inconsistency in here, and I know, as you've pointed out, that this is not these are not your statements, but it is something that you solicited from Chief Lee. Chief Lee says that the department has not released any rendition of the events of the evening to anyone other than the office of the state attorney. In the very same document, Chief Lee says, Mr. Zimmerman's statement was that he had lost sight of Trayvon and was returning to his truck to meet the police officer when he says he was attacked. Now, that is a rendition of events. It exists in the very same document where Chief Lee maintains that they have not released a rendition of events. That is Zimmerman's specific rendition of those events. Does it trouble you that Chief Lee would give Zimmerman's version of the story and then in the same document claim that they're not giving any version of the story?
I think you've raised one of the questions that we have. Certainly the information provided, we did, since that information provided did release the 911 tapes over the weekend. So the document that you're referring to, while it is still on the city's website, is dated and was released some time ago.
I want to go to one more of these questions, and I recognize that it's not your document, it's Chief Lee, but you will decide whether Chief Lee stays employed in this city, and I just want to get the things that you might be concerned about in making that decision. The question that is answered here, the question is posed, why did Mr. Zimmerman have a firearm in his position while acting in the role of a neighborhood watch member? Now, I would submit to you that that is a highly prejudicial question. It assumes that he was of a neighborhood watch member. I don't know of any evidence that he was acting as a neighborhood watch member. That is simply something he says. And Mr. Lee, Chief Lee, says in this report to the public in Sanford, he said that training provided by law enforcement agencies to neighborhood watch organizations stresses no contact surveillance of suspicious situations and notifying police. There is no evidence, absolutely no evidence, that Mr. Zimmerman received any such training. So why would Chief Lee be referring to training when talking about Mr. Zimmerman?
There are 2 points. One is the question. The frequently asked question is the question that we're being asked. It isn't the question that we're posing, but we have been asked that question. Why was he acting as a neighborhood watch person when, in fact, he may not have been?
And just one more thing, and it's just about the nature of this document that you requested from your police chief, and your police chief submitted to you and then to the public, and I think this goes to the decision you have to make about whether to fire him or not. Chief Lee says about Mr. Zimmerman, this is a very important phrasing here, about Mr. Zimmerman. He says, he was, in fact, on a personal errand in his vehicle when he observed Mr. Martin in the community and called the Sanford Police Department. In fact, how does Chief Lee know that it is a fact that this guy was on a personal errand? How did he determine that that is a fact? And that, just to abbreviate this, that strikes me as a highly prejudicial finding without any basis of evidence or proof that the chief would then present to you as a fact.
That's based upon their interview with Mr. Zimmerman.
But now let's go to the question. Can you find it in any way you view the way your city should be policed, that this chief who would issue this report to you and to the public that you find inconsistent, that you see holes in, under a situation like this where you needed the best possible offer to the public of the truth as we know it, can you see any reason that he should be continuing in this job? And is there any reason you see tonight why you should not fire him tonight?
I stated that I think it should be reviewed by law enforcement experts. That's the point that I think. I need to have facts. You've pointed out some questions. There are certainly questions. This was all regrettable. There are certainly questions, no doubt about it. I want to have an independent law enforcement agency look at the situation, look at how the Sanford Police Department conducted their investigation, and then share with me their analysis of the work done by the Sanford Police Department. Based on that information, I'll be glad to make a decision.
Mr. Bonaparte, would you consider suspending him in this tense time under these conditions where he has obviously lost the confidence of your city commission?
Certainly, there are options on the table for me to consider. I'm
joined here at the table by Reverend Al Sharpton. He's going to be down there tomorrow, and I'd like him to have a chance to speak to you about this.
Certainly.
Yes, first of all, I think that it is good that the commission voted, but I think that it is clearly the responsibility of you and others to deal with the fact if this man cannot do his job, that you put the safety and the tranquility of the city at stake, keeping him there. Clearly, there's enough questions, as you raised, Mr. Bonaparte, that are so troubling. I don't see how he can continue running that force. But I also want to caution that let's not take a battle for the war and take our eye off of Zimmerman. The desire of the family is the prosecution and arrest of Mr. Zimmerman. It should not end with Chief Lee, but it certainly should start there.
Well, I think that the Reverend and I certainly agree. What we want as a community, more than anything else, since we cannot bring back Trayvon Martin, is that justice be served. And that's the main point that we would like to see. That's why we've asked the state's attorney's office to expedite any review. The state attorney said he's empowering a grand jury as of April 10th. Unfortunately, that's so far away. But I think that with the Reverend, we agree that what we want as a community is that justice be done in this situation.
But what we don't agree is that you can't wait to April 10th and have Chief Lee, who has all of these unanswered questions still open, operating as the chief of police in that city and operating over what goes on in that city while this is going on. He must step aside. You cannot ask your city and the nation to wait for a grand jury that doesn't even convene to April 10th, and then no one knows how long it will operate. You can't ask everybody to let Chief Lee continue to operate when all of these unanswered questions are there. He should step aside while this examination is going on.
That's certainly on the table, Reverend, but I again think that as a city manager, I would want to have an outside review that helps me from a law enforcement perspective. Say, yes, this is where the Sanford police did not do their job.
But Mr. Bonaparte, a law enforcement expert can tell you whether he broke the law or whether he did something unethical, because there's possible criminal stuff that could have been done, cover-ups. That's what law enforcement does. You run the city. How can you manage the city with a chief that has such outstanding questions? I'm talking about the management of day-to-day law enforcement of the city. Has nothing to do with the legalities, nothing to do with what did or didn't happen in the case. How can he operate the police department given that your own commissioner has voted and given that there's so many outstanding questions that you as an administrator would have to say, until these questions are answered, how can I depend on you to do your job?
Those are the conversations I'll be having with Chief Lee.
Well, Mr. Bonaparte, I want to thank you very much for joining us tonight. Reverend Sharpton is going to be down there tomorrow. He may get possibly meet with you down there.
I welcome that very much, Reverend.
I think you can understand the pressure that's building on this, and I understand in the position you're in, you may be making different decisions on a day-to-day basis, as we saw from the City Commission today. And I do hope you take into consideration that vote of no confidence and speak to the City Commissioners about exactly why they cast those votes.
I think the Reverend was right. The tragedy took place, and where we want to get is to justice, and I certainly respect his opinion, as well as those that are saying that Chief Lee needs to step down.
Well, I look forward to probably talking to you tomorrow, and let me say this. I would think not only you have to consider what we've raised tonight, if Chief Lee has respect for the city he serves, he would do you and the city a favor by voluntarily stepping aside until all these things are answered. Even he would have to admit these questions beg for some answers. And if he loves the city and supports the confidence he's been given in the past, he should voluntarily step aside until these issues are resolved.
Mr. Bonaparte, one quick technical question before we go. Is it within your power to fire the chief at any time? Is there any contractual or civil service requirement that would in any way delay your ability to separate him from that job instantaneously?
The chief, as well as other department directors and the city manager form of government, work at the pleasure of the city manager.
It's all up to you. Mr. Bonaparte, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Coming up, we're going to have more questions about the police procedure in this case as new details emerge on what they did do and exactly what they did not do, the strange things that they did not do on the night of the killing. And eventually later, we will get to some politics here where the ridiculous Republican presidential campaign has been upended today by a child's toy. Really, it was. We'll tell you everything you need to know about the big Etch-a-Sketch scandal that has engulfed the Romney campaign today. And in the rewrite tonight, Fox News tells the biggest lie anyone has ever tried to tell about Mitt Romney, if we get to it.